There we go. So today we're going to talk about bar, line, area, row, combo charts. And these are probably account for maybe, I don't know, 80% of charts you ever see anywhere. So this is pretty important. Um, they're also pretty easy to build, so I'm not going to focus too much on how to build them in Metabase. Metabase is very user-friendly and intuitive, so building a bar chart is just 30 seconds. I'm going to give you a brief review and some overview of some options, but we're going to spend the bulk of the webinar talking about how you should think about your bar charts, kind of the mental model for what you need to do to build a good bar or line or area chart. I'm going to demo for you how I would approach improving a bar chart and explain the decisions that I make. And then we're going to talk about some best practices like which chart to use and when to use stacked charts or not use them. So let's start with a brief overview. I'm going to be talking about these 6 types of charts that you see: the bar, line, area, combo, row chart. That's 5. I have a PhD in math. Did you know that? I can't distinguish 5 from 6. So these types of charts, they work pretty similarly in Metabase. So I'm just going to be mostly focusing on bars and line charts, but almost everything I say will apply to other charts as well. So first, let's talk about what is a chart. A chart is something that really displays summarized information, right? You don't have a chart for every single order or every single user. You display a chart for a count of orders or like total average and something like this. So the way your chart is built and the way you display it depends on what summaries you use. So for example, in my query builder, I can put orders table and I can say, let me count the orders by category. If I click visualize, Metabase will create a bar chart for me. That's great. If instead I say, let me do a count of rows of orders by created at, Metabase will create a line chart for me, right? So the only thing that changed is the type of the summary. And that's the most important thing that determines which chart you use and how you display your information, right? So Metabase will automatically pick a chart for you. If you have a categorical variable like product category, it will build a bar chart. If you have a time series variable like created at, it will create a line chart. And that's generally what you want to do. What you might have not known, and I definitely did not know, even though I was a Metabase user for like 2 years before I started working here, is that besides summarizing by categories and dates, Metabase also lets you summarize by numerical variables. Like I can count my orders by total, and you see this select out of bin appears, and I can create a distribution chart. So in Metabase, I don't just summarize by numeric variables or by or by time series variables. I can summarize them by numeric variables too. And I told you that Metabase automatically picks the chart for you. It picks a bar chart for category, it picks a line chart for dates, and a distribution chart for numerical variables. That kind of only applies to when you have a chart built in the query builder, so in an interface like this. When you build a chart with SQL, you have all the same charts available to you, but you have to select them manually because Metabase doesn't parse your SQL code. It doesn't know what you're grouping by and what type of column you have. But I want to tell you a little story that, like I said, I was a Metabase user for several years before I joined Metabase. I was just using it for data analysis. And I was just a hardcore SQL believer. I'm like, I am never using this graphical user interface. I know SQL. It's easier for me to write group by than to just figure out these buttons. when I found that option, when I realized that I can do a distribution by clicking a button as opposed to writing binning logic manually in SQL, I'm like, I'm never leaving Query Builder. This is where I live now. This is just so much easier, so much less annoying. I also, if I group by date, I can just change the date granularity over here without like adjusting the SQL function that I use. So this, the way the summaries work in Metabase and how easily they produce a chart is really what converted me to a graphical Query Builder user. But so you can build these bar charts summarized by category, summarized by dates, build line charts. You can also build line charts that are summarized by category, or bar charts that are summarized by date. No one can stop you. We'll talk about why you should or should not do that in a little while. But for now, let's just say we have a chart built. Let's build another very standard bar chart. And you actually have a ton of options available for visualizations. We notice often that people don't even know which options are available. Some of them are quite hidden. For example, well, you probably all know that you can change the color of the bars. But if you click on these little 3 dots, there is a lot more available here. For example, formatting, and you can do stuff at a suffix. For example, orders. And now you see that I have this, the axis changed to orders. I can also change it to currency. Well, that's not a currency, but if it was, I could change it to currency and I'll have like a little dollar sign appear. So this is hidden in this formatting menu over here. Then my absolutely favorite feature of the bar charts is this goal line feature. Let me put something like 6,000. So goal line adds a line to your chart. For example, if you're tracking some KPIs and you have a North Star, this is what I want to hit this quarter. It's a very convenient way to represent your goal, and you can name it something like future. But it's not just cosmetic. It's not just adding a line to your chart. It's actually adds additional functionality to your bar chart. For example, let me save this in my personal collection. And if I have a goal line on my chart, I can now set an alert to when my chart reaches the goal line or when my chart goes below the goal line. That means that I can tell Metabase, send me an email if something good happened and I reached my goal, right? So it adds a nice visual emphasis on the goal, but it also adds functionality for you to get notifications like on Slack or on email. There are a lot of other options like in Access, and we'll cover some of them when we talk about best practices. But just, if you've never explored this, there is a lot in there. So just take a look, and it might happen that the problem that you're trying to solve is already solved by someone very smart at Metabase. Here is another thing I wanted to show you, how format can change the how the chart looks very dramatically. For example, I showed you how the distribution chart works, and I told you that this is my favorite thing in the world, and I can change, for example, the number of bins. There we go. So here's my distribution, right? I grouped by numerical variable. I got the distribution. It's a nice histogram, but I kind of want it to look like a distribution rather than this weird bar chart. So through just manipulating options, I can do things like convert it to an area chart instead of a bar chart. Then I can make my area chart smooth instead of all jagged. I can remove all the dots, and maybe I can even make my line size smaller. And this looks like a real distribution chart, like a density plot, much less than a histogram. So there are lots in options. We're not going to go through all of them, but check those out. So what I really want to talk to you about is how to really think about these charts. I want you to be able to imagine a chart that you want in your brain and know how to recreate it in Metabase. So like I said, charts work with these summaries, right? We need some kind of summary to create a chart, and I showed you how we can summarize by, for example, you have a metric that's count and have a breakout that's created at. So the way charts, bar, line, area, row charts work is determined by the combination of what you have as your metric and what you have as your breakout. So you can have a standard chart like this, just, one metric, one breakout, but you can also add another metric. Like, let's say I want to look at count of orders by months, but I also want to look at maybe the average of order total by months. I can visualize it. This line chart is probably not very helpful to me. I can go and maybe change it to a bar chart and maybe let me filter for the last 12 months so it will be easier to see, right? So I have this two metrics, count and average, as bars next to each other. Also notice that I have two y-axis appearing because my average of order total and the count are on very different scales. So Metabase creates an additional axis, and you can control those axes separately. Or I can represent this as a combination chart. For example, count to me feels like a discrete metric, and average feels like more a continuous metric. So I want the average to be maybe a line instead of a bar. So I can just click on this three dots over there and change the display type to a line chart. And this is what we call a combo chart in Metabase. And maybe I also want it to be different color so it would look prettier. Right? So I can have this several summaries, and I can add some more over a breakout. And they will be different colors. I can style them differently. I can make them, some of them lines, some of them bars. But I could also go the other way. So let's say I remove this. Actually, let me just start a new question. And I add count by, let's say, product category and count created at. So I have one metric, just count, that's broken out by category and year. I visualize, Metabase creates a line chart again for me, and that's because I have a date dimension. I can again convert it to a bar chart, and I get a similar picture as what I had when I had two metrics, when I had bars side by side. But now these bars side by side represent a different dimension rather than a different metric. And what a lot of people find confusing sometimes when creating a bar chart is where does what go? So in Metabase language, the breakout, so what you group by, is called what goes on the x-axis, right? Breakouts are also called dimensions, so it makes sense. We have the year on the x-axis, and if you don't stack your charts, the additional breakouts are also kind of on the x-axis. And if you have several metrics, like let me add my average of total here, that will be the y-axis. Metabase complained to me right now when I have two metrics and two breakouts. Metabase is like, I don't know what to do with it. And that's like, think about it, right? If you have two metrics and two dimensions, there are not enough things on a just two-dimensional bar chart to show this. You already have your colors and your x-axis taken by the breakouts, and the height of the bars is the metric. Like, where do you put the second metric? So Metabase does not know how to handle this, and that is usually what happens when we see people with who just get the picture like this. They just have a lot of breakouts and a lot of metrics, and you just need to go and assign what you want to be your metrics and what you want to be your breakouts. My breakouts are x-axis, so I say created at, and my metrics are count and average of total. Here I get a bar chart. Or I can remove a metric and I can add a breakout and I get a different bar chart. And if I reorder these breakouts, maybe it's a little hard to notice. Notice here that my x-axis has my first breakout created at, and the colors represent the second breakout. If I reorder this by just dragging the cards, I get the opposite one. So the reason why I'm telling you this, right, is because sometimes you're like imagining a chart in your brain and you say, I want these parts to be one color and I want these other parts to be a different color. You'll have to understand what controls the color in Metabase, and it's either adding another breakout or adding another metric. So you decide what your colors are. Are there breakouts or are there metrics? And add them to X or Y axis. So now that we kind of have an idea of how bar charts operate, I want to build a bar chart for you, and I want to tell you why it's bad, and I want to make it better. And then if we have more time at the end of the webinar, I'll also talk about some general best practices. So let me start by making, I think I'm going to work with, there's this data about university, and I'm going to start with a very basic bar chart. So I have this data about university assignments here, just all the assignments for all the classes at some imagined university. And I'm looking at the distribution of assignments by type, right? So this is a perfectly fine bar chart. And, you know, Metabase makes it very easy for you to build a bar chart that is good. It can be better. If you want to really communicate the information effectively and you want to make it easier for the viewers of your charts to say get to the same conclusion as you get to when you look at this chart, you need to help them a little bit. So I'm going to work through this chart and tell you what I don't like about it, and hopefully get a chart that looks better. At least I think it looks better. Who knows? So first thing you need to think about when you think about how do I present the information in the most effective way is how do people actually perceive information? The main thing that we do with our, computers, books, phones, we read, right? And so think about how does your brain work when you read, and try to translate these principles into the chart. So one thing, when I'm looking at something that has x-axis and y-axis, I expect directionality, right? I expect that the x-axis is going from left to right. That's how I usually look at the things in the x-axis. But if my data does not have inherent order, data that does have inherent order, like time series. If I have groups by year here, there is an inherent order to years, so that's just fine. But my data here, like exams, homework, participation, it does not have inherent order, but my brain wants it. That's what I expect from stuff that I read. So instead of just presenting this chart, I'm going to make it a little easier for my brain to process and introduce a sort. And in this case, because there is no inherent order, I can just say, let me sort from largest to smallest, or from smallest to largest. This kind of depends on what you're trying to communicate with your chart. If you're trying to look at which assignments in this case have the largest portion, well, probably ordering from largest to smallest makes more sense, because largest is what is important for me, and I start reading my chart from the leftmost thing, right? So I put the most important thing on the left because that's how I read. If I wanted to emphasize the smallest, I would reverse it. So I'm doing this because my brain wants ordered information, and I didn't have order, and I invented it by like trying to understand what I wanted to communicate. Next, if I try to read this chart when it looks like this, I'm like, okay, I'm reading this first bar, participation. Then if I care about the value, I need to locate my grid lines. Then I need to walk along the grid lines to the x-axis, to the y-axis, see what the value is there. All right, then I need to read the homework bar. Again, I need to go up, look at the grid lines, go back to y-axis, go back. Then I need to next bar. And it's like a lot of moving your eyes around the chart that is not natural, right? We want to just like start here and continue with our chart. So instead of forcing your viewer to like follow the grid lines to the y-axis, I'm going to put the data about the counts directly on the bars. So this is in display settings. There is a setting, show value on data points. Now, this is can be a little controversial because this adds a lot more visual clutter to the chart. So if the numbers are not what you care about, like if you only care about, oh, my exam bar is around half the height of the homework bar, there is no reason to add numbers. But if you actually care about numbers, just add them, because now I don't have to constantly refer back to the y-axis, and I can just read the chart in order. Next, now that I have these numbers, I have a lot of redundant information here. Why do I have the axis then? Why do I have the grid lines? It just adds more stuff, and my brain feels a little bit overloaded. Like, do I need to read the axis? Do I need to, like, what's going on here? A lot of information that does not need to be read. So I'm going to remove the y-axis and marks. I don't need them because I already have the scale on the bars. And here's another thing. I'm imagining this chart on a dashboard, like I have it over here, like this, with a title and everything. So I can call it something descriptive, like count of assignments by type. And then I ask myself, well, do I need this count over here? Do I need this assignment type? Some of us were really drilled in our school that we need to label our axes, right? And that makes sense when you have, for example, two numeric variables, especially if they're on the same scale. Like, who knows which one is which? But when I have count and assignment type, there is no ambiguity versus which axis represents which, and I have both of those in my title. So I can just remove the labels, and that will be understandable type, because an understandable chart, because I know that I have its title over there, and it will be displayed, and it's still clear where is the count and where is the assignments by type. And this reduces the amount of information, again, displayed in the chart. So that makes it easier for your brain to process it. So now, if anyone's asleep right now, I want you people to wake up, because if there's one thing I want you to get out of the webinar, is what I'm going to show next. The absolutely most impactful thing that you can do with your bar chart visualization is doing this. Every bar chart, almost every bar chart, is better as a row chart. And that's, again, following the idea that make it natural for your brain to process information. At least in English, we read from left to right and then from top to bottom. So in this kind of Z shape. When I have a bar chart, I'm reading differently. I'm reading the label of the bar, then I'm reading the value, then I'm reading another label, then I'm reading the value. This is not how I read. But if I have a row chart, I'm reading the label, I'm reading the value left to right, then I'm reading the next label, next value, going top to bottom. This is how I read books. This is the natural way for my brain to process information. This might not seem like a big difference in one chart, but when you have to look at 70 charts per day, this is such a huge improvement. These little cognitive loads add up, and this is now my favorite thing in the world. So order the charts and make them row charts. If just this will improve your charts by a large margin. So I'm still not really satisfied with this chart. One thing I want to do is understand the context in which this chart would be presented, right? If it's just like, what is the point of just showing the breakdown of types of assignments? I'm trying to say something with this chart, right? Maybe I'm trying to say, maybe we have a goal of hitting, for some reason, 2,000 homeworks, and I'm trying to communicate progress towards that goal. And I already showed you how to do this. We can add the goal line to the there we go. They can add the goal line to the chart, right? If that's for some reason you want to hit a goal, add this to the chart because that's what you're communicating. Or maybe what you're trying to communicate with this chart is that our students have so much homework. Look at this homework. It's like as much stuff as all exams and quizzes combined, right? And if that's what you want to communicate, then it would be nice to be able to highlight the part that you're talking about, like homework. So ideally, if that's what was I trying to communicate with my chart, I would want my homework bar to be a different color than other bars, right? And remember how I talked a little bit about building a mental model for how bar charts work? How do you get different colors in charts? You get those by either having an additional metric or having an additional breakout. So if I wanted to have my homework bar, or maybe like homework and quiz bar, different colors, I would need to add either additional metric or additional breakout. I'm going to add an additional breakout, but it can also work with an additional metric. So here's a trick. One of my favorite tricks in Metabase, right? I want assignments that are homework to be one color and assignments that are not homework to be a different color. So I'm going to create a column that just does this. I'm going to say case assignment type is homework. Let me call it maybe true and otherwise false, right? So this is the column that will return true for homeworks and false for everything else. And I'm going to call it is homework. And now I just add a breakout by that column. If I hit visualize, it does not change anything because I need to also manually add the series breakout to the chart settings. And I at least got the colors right? I have the homework color and the non-homework color are different now. They look kind of weird, and that's because it's basically showing 0 and then homework, then it's showing project and 0. So instead of doing this, I'm just going to stack the charts. And this is the chart that I sort of want. Another thing that you need to keep in mind when you're building a chart is that colors are meaningful. Notice how Metabase automatically created sort of greenish and sort of reddish colors when I said it's true and false, right? If you're not trying to communicate kind of positive and negative, don't use those colors, right? Colors like orange, maybe even yellow, red, green, they all have meaning. And if you put those colors in a chart, people will kind of like, is that good? Is that bad? If I make homework green and everything else red, it's like, is homework good and everything else bad? I don't know. So instead of this, I'm just going to say, maybe let me make homework something bright and not homework something less bright and a different color. There's not inherent meaning to these colors, and I make the homework one brighter because that's what I want you to get out of this chart. Look at how much homework our students have. And I also want to rename these series. All right. So this is for if my goal is to talk about how homework is assigned in our university, this is the chart that represents this information better than my original chart that was like this. And you can see the final comparison in this dashboard that was linked. Right? So let me review quickly what we did here, right? We started by thinking how people naturally process information, like written information. Usually left to right, top to bottom, and this is how we want your viewers' eyes to travel on your chart. That reduces the amount of work that their brain has to do, the amount of like scuttling around on a chart that I have to look at the axis, then I have to go back to the bar, look at the axis again. So make sure to present the bar in an order that's natural for your brain to process. Reduce visual clutter, like do you really need axis labels? Do you really need the actual grid lines, right? Sometimes you do. Sometimes that's important to display. Sometimes it isn't. Another thing that I think I didn't show you, but you see on this final chart that is on this dashboard, I show the formatting is slightly different than on this. Sometimes you don't need to see the actual number. Do you really care that there are 1,494 homework assignments, or do you kind of want a ballpark? This is something that you can change in display settings as well, right? And it's again, sometimes you do care that there are exactly 1,494 assignments, and sometimes it's just like the number is suffice. So remove as much information as possible while still communicating what you're trying to communicate with the chart. In fact, go to the chart settings and like uncheck everything, and then start checking a little bit for one by one to understand like what do I actually need to communicate this information, right? So that's reducing cognitive load on your viewer. Just remove stuff that they don't need to look at. So now I still have, I think, a couple of minutes, and I wanted to briefly talk about how to apply these ideas to two problems, picking which charts to use and whether to stack or not stack. So again, think about how you process information. If you look at a line chart, let me make a line chart maybe. So if you look at a line chart, these numbers are connected, right? This connectivity implies relationship, that my previous data point and the next data point are related to each other. In a bar chart, where it's just bars, there is no implication of such relationship. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but it's just like not emphasized by the chart. So when you're thinking, should I build a line chart, a bar chart, or something else, think, is there a relationship between my data points? Now, I know that probably none of you would build a line chart for a like breakdown by categories, but there are subtler points than this. For example, here I give an example of age groups. Age group is an ordinal variable, so there is an order. It makes sense for there to be kind of a continuity, right, between different age groups. But actually, if I look, for example, at average order quantity by age group, there is no relationship between the data points themselves. There are relationships between groups and they're ordered in this way, but there are no relationships between the data points. So having a line or an area chart is just confusing. Like, does the order quantity from 18-25-year-olds flow somehow into 25 to 40-year-olds? No, these are just like, these are different people. So in these cases, it's better to use a bar chart. The next point is, what is it that you want to emphasize? If I look at this line chart, what I see on this chart is line going up, right? If I stare at it for a little longer, I see little variations. I could probably figure out what was the value in like January 2024, but the immediate thing that this chart communicates to me is line going up. If I change this to a bar chart, the immediate thing that jumps out to me are these bars that are like taller than everything else, or this bar that is smaller than everything else. If I spend an additional half a second looking at this chart, I also see, okay, there is kind of an upwards trend and maybe some variation. But really, when I'm looking at a bar chart, it's about the size of the metric. Whereas where I'm looking at a line chart, it's about the direction of the metric. And neither of these are wrong representations, right? It's just, what is it that you want to emphasize on your chart? Here is an example of representing the same data using a line chart or a bar chart. If I have this line chart, I'm like, oh, numbers are going down. That's bad news. If I look at the bar chart for the same data, I'm really like, this quarter was pretty nice, huh? This was also pretty nice. And then I'm noticing that maybe my bars are going down, right? It's the same data. Neither is right or wrong. It's just like, what is the story that you're trying to tell with these charts? If you're to tell a story about the size, the total, the quantity, then use a bar chart. If you're trying to tell a story about the trend, then use an area chart. Finally, it's using what I say here, line charts for small changes. So if you ever worked with any rating data, you know that ratings are usually have very narrow band. Like, it's not like the distribution of ratings is like between 1 and 5. It's usually between like 375 and 4.5 or something, right? And if I display this data on a bar chart, it's do these numbers change? Like, what this does not communicate to me the difference between different years. It's just like, these bars kind of look the same to me. Now, what some people do is they say, well, let me just start my bars at 3. Don't do that. Bars and areas are perceived by us as like this accumulation. Bars and areas should always start at 0. If you're not starting bars and areas at 0, you're lying to your viewers, because people will assume that it does start at 0. So just don't do it. Instead, if you want to communicate small changes like this, you can use a line chart. And on a line chart, because there is no assumption that it's kind of like total of something, you can disconnect it from 0. Like, you see this line chart changes from 3.9 to 4.2. And just like, it does display the information that I was interested in, like, how does my product rating change over time? Seems like it's decreasing continuously, and like, maybe I should do something about that, which is an information I can't really get easily by looking at the bar chart. Like, I have to read the numbers, and that's pretty annoying. And I'm starting to run out of time here, so I'm just going to say again, just use a row chart. This is the one thing that you should learn from this webinar. In case you're interested, I have another tab on this dashboard as when to use or not use stacked charts. And I give you some examples of how, here, my pitch is that you should not use stacked charts. Stacks add a lot of information. Like, look at this chart. Look at this chart. There is so much going on there. So many colors, so many bars. And that's a lot of information for your brain to process. You need to like sit down and, okay, well, let me spend the next half an hour looking at these bars and comparing every one of those. That's fine, but that's not, great for just someone skimming your dashboard. So I give you some ideas about how to represent data in better or even better ways. Like, for example, maybe you just don't need stacking at all, or you want to represent stacks as like 100% if that is what you care about. Sometimes it is, and use a row chart. And sometimes there are charts that just don't do that. For example, if I have a chart like this, I'm not making it better. I'm saying I did a wrong chart. For example, I could just add a bar chart without breakouts and maybe like a filter for the breakout so that a viewer could adjust what they're looking at instead of like dumping all that information onto them at once. And another practice that I personally am against, and this is also controversial, is that you should avoid using stacked area charts, because depending on the order of stacked areas, you get basically different information. I have two graphs over here, and you see, like, look at this dip over here. These are the same graphs, but with different order of breakouts. And see here, you see like it's going down and then going up. For every single one of these, it's going up. But on this chart, it's going down, and it continues to go down for 3 out of 4 breakout values. So it shows you a different thing, even though it's the same data, just because I reordered the breakout. So, avoid using stacked area charts if you have because they tend to under or overestimate changes. And that's because what I was talking about earlier, area charts are good for sizes, but not for changes. All right, I am a little bit over time here, so let me pause here and look at the chat, which is over there.